Hey everyone, we've got Zendikar Rising spoilers here. Set's completely spoiled. We're going to go over everything starting out here in white, starting with Allied Assault at 2 and a white. Up to 2 target creatures each get +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures in your party. That is a scary combat trick. Even at +1/+1, that is potentially a blowout, but when you start getting +2/+2, +3/+3, or Christmas Land +4/+4, that's an extra 8 power. That's just game ending. And literally just like they didn't block, they're dead. Or, of course, usually these tricks are best when they do block. So that's the thing I see a lot of the time with new players. They'll be very excited to push through extra damage by pumping a creature. Generally, the way that pump works the best is when they block your 4/4 with their 5/5, and then you make yours bigger. Now, instead of trading a 4/4, or just losing a 4/4, you're actually just trading the card in your hand for their 5/5. So that's the type of thing you want to be careful of in the pre-release. Usually pump is going to be best used to win in combat, though of course you don't ever want to lose sight on winning the game. If it is possible to win the game with it, that is obviously the better option, but there's a big difference in between doing 3 damage when someone's at 3 or doing an extra 3 damage when you've got a lot of game left ahead. Angel Heart Protector at 2 and a white for a 3/2 reasonably powered creature, and when it enters the battlefield, a creature you control gets indestructible. That's going to be a difficult tempo play for people to contend with in the early game. So if you've got a 3/3 and your opponent was looking to trade, and then you're able to play this and turn it sideways without fear, I mean, that is a really solid use of it. Of course, you're not going to be able to get this thing down at instant speed. I don't anticipate Death and Taxes audibling from the Flicker Wisp plan to this. Of course, Flicker Wisp is used in Legacy at 3 mana to Aether Vial in and protect permanents by exiling them. So Angel Heart Protector, it's an interesting card. It does help out your party in Limited, but I don't see just a much constructed application there at first look. Angel of Destiny. I think Commander players are going to have a lot of fun with this. At 3 and 2 white, this 2/6 double strike creature is fairly complicated. So whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player, combat damage only, you and that player both gain that much life. And then also at the beginning of your end step, if you have at least 15 more than your starting life total, each player Angel of Destiny attack this turn loses the game. So basically, this is a one-shot kill against a opponent if, at the end of your turn, you're at 35 in a regular game or 55 in Commander. Both of those numbers are not that hard to get to as life gain. I mean, with this, this is all sorts of life gain potential. So I think this card's going to be super dangerous and Limited. And, of course, the double strike 2/6 body is a lot to grapple with in terms of just the combat phase. Archon of Emeria. This is a card that I would not be surprised to see people trying to play around with in Brew. This is really, really powerful for Legacy. However, the casting costs, really awkward. So we've got 2 and a white for a 2/3 flyer. Each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn, and non-basic lands your opponent control enter the battlefield tapped. For fetch lands, that is a nightmare. So you play your Scalding Tarn or Misty Rainforest, Polluted Delta, whatever blue fetch you're playing to try and kind of have a nice smooth control deck mana base, and instead you're playing a Polluted Delta coming into play tapped. Then when you sack it, if you get a dual land, that also comes into play tapped. So that is just gross. The 2/3 body is pretty easy to remove, but I wouldn't be shocked to see this in a Stompy Shell. So just throwing it out there. I haven't brewed with it or anything, but playing this off of an Ancient Tomb or a City of Traders along with Mox Diamond or Chrome Mox, I could see this coming down early and a Chalice of the Void deck and just being a huge pain to contend with. So we'll see. Maybe a white Stompy deck can make good use of this guy. I actually think it's got some potential for constructed play, and it is the type of card that I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up seeing play down the line if there's a critical mass over time of cards that are going to allow you to take advantage of that type of turn 1 3 mana play. We saw that with Sea Stompy back in the day. There was a mono blue Legacy deck that had Sea Drake and a few other printings that eventually just kind of hit the point where it was like, wow, we can get out Sword of Feast and Sword of Fire and Ice. We can get out so many things for 3 mana. we're potentially putting out like a big body on turn 1 and then getting out Sword of Fire and Ice and equipping it on turn 2, or of course the ability to use a Soul Land to put out a Chalice can be very good versus so many decks that rely on those 1 casting cost spells. Archpriest of Iona, 1 mana and 2 toughness. Its power is equal to the number of creatures in your party, so yeah, sure, it'll be a 4/2 in Christmas Land. At the beginning of your combat, if you have a full party, target creature gets +1/+1 and flying until end of turn, so even more of an upside. 1 mana 4/2s, not enough of an upside for this card. On top of it, you also get to get +1/+1 and flying, so potentially crashing in for 5 with a 1-drop. Of all of the party cards, it's going to take a lot to actually have them come together. It's certainly not going to be something that happens early. Attended Healer is a cleric. When you gain life for the first time, you get a 1/1 cat creature, 2 and a white. A different cleric you control gains lifelink until end of turn. This is going to bring herds of cats to the board in many games, and I think in Limited it's going to be something to contend with. I think getting incremental advantage is much bigger than it looks on paper a lot of the time, and just amassing 1/1s like that can really make attacking a huge pain, as well as the lifelink element. So being able to attack in the air would be kind of the default way to get around a massive board stall, but if you're just gaining life from these clerics, I mean, that is a very interesting card for your pre-release pool. Canyon Jerboa, when a land enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Of course, all of the landfall cards are going to be happy to have anything get multiple lands at the same time. This guy, if you've got the support, it's a very good effect. But if you don't have a bunch of tricks to get multiple lands into play, this may not be worth the 3 mana. We'll see. I could be very wrong. I mean, it depends on what the kind of board states end up looking like, and having not played the set, really can't weigh in with any type of authority, but offhand, 3 mana, 1 power creatures, not the best starting place for a Magic card. Cliffhaven's Sellsword for 2 mana, we got a 3/1. Now that's a card I can generally get behind. It's a warrior, which helps out for party, and 3 power, 2 casting cost cards I'm a fan of for Limited. I've had a lot of green-white decks. Usually black-red is where I'll often land in a sealed deck format or draft that tends to be some of the best cards in the sets for Limited, because they tend to have the best creature removal. Many exceptions to that. But that said, I've had plenty of green-white decks, which is one of my least favorite combinations to play, and I've just had to play it because I was clearly going to go undefeated with the build, having so much aggression early on, some good combat tricks. It's a pretty easy formula to pull off, and it gives you plenty of time for trading, as your matches only end up taking 15 minutes out of the 50-minute round. Dauntless Unity, 2 mana with a kicker for an additional 2. Creatures you control get +1/+1, and if the kicker, they get +2/+1 instead. That is very good with herds of cats, and at common, you're going to be able to snag this in draft. You expect to see it in your sealed pool very often as well, so this card is totally respectable as a combat trick, and also as a game-winning kind of crushing blow at the end, a mini overrun for 4 mana at instant speed. Definitely sign off on that card. Disenchant, just amazing they haven't done anything better. They keep printing it. It still sees play in Vintage, which is just insane. We've got Wear Tear, we've got all sorts of different options, Fragmentize, you name it. There's been a lot of different things that are Disenchant adjacent, but they've never done anything strictly better, and Disenchant continues to show up 27 years later. Emiria Captain at 4 mana. This 1/1 has flying and vigilance, and then the upside of enters the battlefield of a +1/+1 for each creature in your party. So worst case scenario, it enters the battlefield as a warrior, and you get a +1/+1 counter. So 4 mana, 2/2 flying vigilance. Not the most exciting. I mean, it's not great, but if you have one other member in your party, 3/3 for 4. Exciting. Anything more than that is really savage for 4 mana, so that is a really interesting card for Limited. Emiria's Call at 7 mana, you get 2/4/4 angels and non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible until your next turn. That is a massive tempo shift, potentially just holding down the fort long enough for those 2 4-power angels to just end the game. Now this one's going to be devastating, and worst case scenario, you can play it as a white producing land, potentially untapped if you're willing to sacrifice the 3 life needed for that. So that is a very, very interesting Magic card, and I expect it'll be very good in Limited, and probably fine in Commander as well. We really don't know how big a deal it's going to be able to have cards that can also play as a land. It's like, do you not just play that over a Plains in a mono white deck like every time? Like, maybe. Expedition Healer, 2 mana, 2/2 with Vigilance, has lifelink as long as you control another cleric. Very, very punitive if you can keep the board clear in the early stages to be able to continue to just keep turning sideways. And of course, it puts the pressure on your opponent to block. So if you do have combat tricks, any type of pump effects, you can turn this thing sideways and just put your opponent in a terrible spot of trying to block with their own 2/2, and then you're just gaining life and getting rid of their board. This guy, definitely, I can sign off on him as well. Farsight Adept, when it enters the battlefield, you and target opponent each draw a card. Don't really know how to feel about this card. I mean, you're both drawing a card. You're down a card for having played this, but it is a 3/3 for 3. I'm probably not going to be sleeving this card up. We'll see how Wizards are in demand for Party, but I mean, just in general, giving your opponent a free card for nothing is a pretty substantial drawback, and I don't think it's truly offset by the fact that you get to draw a card as well, but I could be wrong on that one. Fearless Fledgling, love the art on this one, hilarious look to it. Reminds me of a video that you can find on YouTube called Kiwi. Just crazy looking. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Fearless Fledgling, and it gains flying until end of turn. And that is probably fine. I mean, you're going to be able to grow this over the course of many turns, and I picture this one kind of creating inevitability where, you'll get a 2/2 for 2 pretty early on. You're going to hit your first few land drops, and then eventually, I mean, you're just going to be playing a land to leap this thing into the air and smash them in the teeth for like 4, 5, 6 damage. So that could be a major problem. And uncommons are really the thing that I get the most interested in when I'm looking at spoilers, because that's where the majority of your strength is going to come from. If you happen to get like sick rares and mythics, awesome. If you're the best player in the room, you're going to very easily win, but you can definitely take down pre-releases with a pool that really doesn't have anything special at the rare and uncommon slot if you have those really strong uncommons. Felidar Retreat at 4 mana, landfall. You can either create a 2/2 cat or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and give them all vigilance till end of turn. That's a pretty powerful effect. The fact that it doesn't do anything on its own is a pretty significant drawback, but depending on the amount of landfall that you can expect, I think the landfall cards, as they get more expensive, tend to get a little bit worse. Like a 4 mana card that only does things with landfall, it requires you to have like a bunch of extra lands in order to get enough value out of it, and the higher the casting cost, the more lands you've already played out of your deck. So obviously if you had like an 18 casting cost card with landfall, it'd be garbage because you're literally not going to have any lands left in your deck to play. So this is a little bit of an issue with these type of card designs. The higher the casting cost, the worse landfall is, and you're also potentially not as excited to be playing the land. So when you have like a 2-drop that has landfall, that's great because you were definitely playing a land on turn 3 and turn 4 and hopefully turn 5. But this is a little bit of a drawback there. Could certainly break through board states, though. Just giving +1/+1 to your whole team is not nothing. Journey into Oblivion, 5 casting costs, but it does cost 1 less for each creature in your party, so, sometimes 1 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you exile a non-land permanent an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield. So basically a potentially reasonably cost Oblivion Ring style effect, and potentially a very undercosted effect. So we'll see how that ends up being. Removal at any casting cost is often good enough in Limited. Removing your opponent's bombs is pretty much mandatory to winning the game. Kabira Outrider, 4 casting, costs 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets +1/+1 for your party. So potentially doing a +4/+4 for 4 with a 3/3 body. I think this card's going to be totally respectable. Kabira Takedown. This one can come into play as a tapped land, or you can have it deal damage equal to the number of creatures you control to target creature or planeswalker. This one's a little tougher to evaluate. This could be pretty bad, but I got a feeling that the way they designed this set, that it's probably going to be fine. You're probably going to be able to kill something with this, and hopefully something decent. It's just a question of how stalled out the boards get and how many creatures you'll actually have. So, I mean, it's certainly the way you draw it up, it's a good card, but the question is how many games is this going to be really pretty poor, and there's no way for me to know that at this stage. Kitesail Cleric, 1 casting, costs 1/1, but if you kick it, you can tap up to 2 target creatures. It's, again, difficult to evaluate, could be fine. 1/1 for 1. Generally not great. Like, starting out with that is not usually very exciting unless you have some equipment or some type of bonuses, +1/+1 counters, something like that you're going to be able to tossing around. And just in general, 1/1s for 1, that's another thing that I really see newer players kind of fall into. We've seen it in War of the Spark a ton, where people were very excited about those 1-drops in the set, but at the end of the day, they don't stand up very well to anything that's in the format. So once things gets going, it's basically a dead card. So kind of the best case scenario for this is tapping down 2 key blockers and swinging for lethal, which, I mean, if you're going for Christmas Land, you will sometimes get there with that play. Core Blade Master, 2 casting, costs 1/1 with double strike, and equipped warriors you control also have double strike. So as a 1-power creature, this is going to hit for 2 and is fairly respectable. So hitting for 2 for 2, pretty fine. Giving your other warriors double strike could be really, really scary. And depends on how much equipment you have. But overall, I mean, this is not an embarrassing card to sleeve up. Probably makes the cut in many decks that are playing white at the pre-release. Core Celebrant, 3 casting, costs 1/4. Whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. So a bigger Soul Sister. There's, what is it? Soul Warden, Essence Warden, and there's another one in white. But there's a bunch of 1 casting cost cards that when another creature enters the battlefield, you get a point of life. And, this could have some synergy with some of the life gain triggers that are in the set. Also helps out your party. Legion Angel. I'm not sure where this card fits in. It's kind of odd. When it enters the battlefield, you can reveal a card from your hand, named Legion Angel from outside the game, and you can put it into your hand. At pre-release, I don't know if you just play both of them main deck if you have to. Like, on turn 4, getting a 4/3 is pretty sick. And if you've got any type of removal or any type of way of holding down the fort, you're potentially just going to win the race, just turning sideways and even just chump blocking the last couple of turns. So it's a very interesting Magic card, but I'm not sure where it fits in. In Commander, they generally don't like to play with the outside the game clause. So things like Karn, they generally don't like you having a wish board in most play groups. So I'm not sure where they designed this for, other than, perhaps Standard, where it could be really strong. I mean, you're just able to use your sideboard to get a bunch of Legion Angels, and but again, it's in Constructed, you've got the 4 of rule. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking it through in real time. I'm not sure what the heck this card's supposed to be able to do for you. So I don't know. Maybe you play 1 in a control deck, and when you get it, then it's overkill? I don't know. I am not sure. Very interesting card, though. Let me know what your thoughts are on this one, because it's really interesting design. Luminarch's Aspirant, 2 mana, 1/1 at the beginning of your turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. This is probably an exception to the 1-power creature being interesting. It's going to quickly make itself a 2/2, and then each turn get even bigger. The fact that you don't have to do another creature makes this so much better. If you had to have another creature, I would be pretty down on this card. But overall, I mean, I think that's pretty cool. You get that whole grow effect of just continuing to ramp up. And I think people will have a lot of fun with that. If I've learned anything from playing Pauper with my nephew James, is he does enjoy the ability to just grow creatures and just keep adding counters and turning things into just giant, 20/20 elves and stuff. So I think this card people are actually going to have a lot of fun with, regardless of just how good it is. I mean, I think it's going to be good. Maybe it's insane. Either way, people are going to have a lot of fun with it. Makindi Ox, 5 casting costs, 4/4, landfall, tapping a creature an opponent controls. I think that's pretty good. Overall, it's a big body, and tapping creatures is basically creature removal. If you can just tap a creature every turn, it's very similar to it not even being there. So overall, I think this is a card that's going to be totally fine in many sealed decks. And that 4/4 body can potentially really help stabilize against an early onslaught of 2 and 3 power creatures. Makindi Stampede, 5 mana to give all creatures you control +2/+2 until end of turn. Can also enter the battlefield as a tapped white source. I don't know. There's cards that can be overcosted, but the effect is still good. So we get to see for 3 mana +2/+0. Like, that's just a thing that happens in limited very, very often, and sometimes at instant speed. So I don't know. +2/+2 for 5. Like, Overrun is +3/+3 and Trample. That card's phenomenal. We'll see how good this ends up being, and the fact that you can play it early as a land. Is again, for Commander, like, you're playing a mono white deck, how many of these do you really pass on? Like, are you really that excited about sleeving up a bunch of planes when you could play something that has the upside? Maul of the Skyclaves, 3 mana. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to a creature you control, which I think maybe all of the equipment in this set has that. It's certainly most, if not all. And this is going to give a creature +2/+2 flying and first strike. So I think this is a very, very good piece of equipment. I mean, what does it say? Like, it's just really, really powerful. You're going to take potentially a decent sized creature, send it up in the sky where it does not belong, to just finish the game and make it just so difficult to contend with. +2/+2 and first strike is an awful lot. And this looks like a pretty well-balanced Magic card. It looks like very, very good, but at least the equip cost is 4, so there's a little bit of counterplay there if your opponent can take out the creature that you're trying to, or that you do equip this to. I mean, there is that. Mesa Lynx, 2 mana for a 2/1, and as long as it's not your turn, he gets +0/+2. It seems fine. I actually think a lot of the bears in this set are actually more exciting than this guy. Usually a 2 mana part-time 2/3 would actually be, totally fine, but I think maybe he might be on kind of the lower end of our 2-drops. Nahiri's Binding, at 3 mana, you can enchant a creature or planeswalker, and they can't attack, block, and its activated abilities can't be used. Sorry about that, guys. Hopefully that wasn't hideous sounding. That is a pacifism that can also hit planeswalkers, which I think is going to be potentially constructed playable. We'll see. For something like Standard, the fact that handling planeswalkers can often be very difficult, I think that's an interesting option to be able to kind of handle a creature or actually handle a planeswalker, at least until they get rid of the enchantment. Ondu Inversion, 8 mana, destroy all non-land permanents. I think this is definitely going to be a big Commander card. Why not? Like, who cares that it comes into play tapped, especially for casual players? I think this one's going to see a lot of Commander play, and I actually find this card to be fascinating for Limited as well, because very often board sweepers are some of the more challenging cards to figure out if you should play or not. If you're in like a hyper-aggressive deck, very often it's wrong to play a board sweeper because it's just undoing everything that you're trying to do, and it's unlikely your opponent's board is going to be better than your board. But here, I mean, this is a tough one to say no to. If things go really wrong and your opponent just like is crushing you, you can totally reset the game. And if not, you've just got a basic or a land to play. So I think that card's really, really interesting. Paired Tactician, 3 mana for a 3/2, and when it and at least one other warrior attack, put a +1/+1 on it. that can get out of hand very fast. I think warriors could be a very good theme here. Of course, the set on the surface really pushes parties, but so far we've seen really strong support for warriors and clerics out of white. Practice tactics. 1 mana instant. You can choose a attacking or blocking creature and deal damage to twice the number of creatures in your party to it. So potentially 8 damage for 1 white. This card, so if you have 2, it's doing 4, which is pretty much where you'd want to be. I mean, at 1 mana removal, it's not the type of card I enjoy. I think a lot of the stuff that they've printed in this set is going to be better than it looks, but I do think that the drawbacks are going to feel really bad. So Magic has, in general, tried to move towards getting rid of the feel-bads, and yet they've also introduced a whole new wave of feel-bads here. This is likely a type of card that you're going to need to play just to have some removal, and you're going to feel awful when you just have like an Archon and an Angel and like no warriors or clerics or wizards or rogues, and it's just sitting there as a brick in your hand. So, this, or they respond, and take out your 1 warrior when you were trying to do 2 damage to something. So, I mean, I hope that you get to have your pre-release in Christmas Land and all of your party cards work out, but be aware that they could feel really bad when they backfire. Pressure Point. I kind of love this card. 2 mana, tap a creature, draw a card. Like, that's just the type of thing I like to do. In Limited, tap down a creature during the end step or like prior to combat. I mean, I like it. Drawing cards I like. There's not too much I don't like about this card. Don't love the art, but don't really like to take pot shots at that. Yeah, I think this card is going to be totally fine, not embarrassing. I mean, it's not like a first pick by any stretch, but, when you're thinking about running an extra land or not, like this is the type of card that I generally run over that extra land in order to get the card drawing and get a creature out of there. So I like this card for what it is. I don't want to oversell it, but like that to me is a pretty fun Magic card. Prowling Felidar, 4 mana, 2/3 with Vigilance. And when a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Those landfall triggers can definitely add up over time and create a big incentive to have those extra cards in your deck that you can play as either lands or instants or sorceries. As at a certain point, if you have 2 or 3 landfall abilities, it's going to be tough to beat the value of a card coming in as a land. Resolute Strike. 1 mana to give a creature +2/+2 until end of turn, and if it's a warrior, you can attach an equipment you control to it. I like this card a lot for the type of decks that I often, when I'm playing white, usually when I'm playing white, it's because it's an aggressive curve, often paired with either red or green, and I love this card for that. Giving your bears +2/+2, and if it's a warrior, potentially snagging an equipment and cheating a really high equip cost. I mean, this one's going to definitely end some games. Seagate Banneret, 1 mana, 1/2. You can pay 5 to give creatures you control +1/+1. This is another one of those ones that's a little difficult to assess whether or not it's going to be good enough. Now, if this was a 2/2 for 1, like I think we've seen that before, where it's like a green card, if you have a plains, it gets +1/+0 or something. Maybe I'm remembering that card incorrectly, but this Anthem effect of paying 5 to give everything +1/+1 is very interesting. You're probably not going to get to 10 mana, but we'll see. If that's the case, then maybe this type of card will be even stronger. Overall, I probably wouldn't be psyched to sleeve up this card, to be honest, but I could definitely see people losing to this on pre-release weekend as well. Sajiri Shelter, 2 mana to give a creature you control protection from the color of your choice until end of turn is a lot for that effect, but again, you get to play it as a land in a, not necessarily worst case scenario, but just if that's what's needed. Sometimes lands are going to be the perfect top deck in this format. Shepherd of Heroes, we've got a 5 mana, 3/4 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life for each creature in your party, so potentially gaining 8, and this card feels fine. It's a cleric, so you're going to gain at least 2 in most situations, unless they remove it in response, so I think this card's totally fine, and again, a card that would likely make the cut in a pre-release pool running white. Skyclave Apparition. This one has constructed application, I think. This could be interesting in Death and Taxes and Legacy. I know there's a meme every time a new white creature gets printed. It's like, oh, is this good enough for Death and Taxes? But I think compared to the Archon, I think this one's probably more interesting because this one is answering something that's already been committed to the board instead of trying to come down before your opponent is getting the effect of their fetch lands and, you know, looking to play multiple spells in a turn. So Skyclave Apparition, when it enters the battlefield, exile up to one target non-land, non-token permanent that you don't control with a converted mana cost 4 or less. And when it leaves the battlefield, they get a XX blue illusion token, where X is the converted mana cost. So this is basically a force ghost. You take out their Jace, and then if they ever handle the apparition, then they're going to get a 4/4 in that instance, which I think is probably pretty solid for Death and Taxes. I think the fact that you can vial this guy in is interesting, and he's just an answer to all sorts of stuff. So I think this card's going to be experimented with in the D&T lists, and we'll see if it ends up making the cut. There's been lots of cards that looked like they could be an interesting addition. Brimaz comes to mind immediately, but we'll see. No flying on this one. Kind of feels like it should, but, you know, it is what it is. If it had flying, it would be way, way better, to be fair. Skyclave Cleric, 2 mana for a 1/3. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. It can also come in as a land. Don't really have anything exciting to say about this card. Might be something to hold your nose and play. It does fill out your party. Can come in as a land, but overall, 2 casting costs, 1 power creatures. Need to do a lot more than that. That is certainly no Dreadhorde Arcanist. Squad Commander, 4 mana for a 3/3. Enters the battlefield. You get a white core warrior for each creature in your party. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, your creatures get +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. That's a nightmare to play against. And if you are able to get I mean, thank goodness you're just making warriors with this instead of getting like the rest of the members of your party. But this card is going to be very, very difficult to play against. It's reasonably costed just as is, and that upside is absolutely massive. Smite the Monstrous, destroy a creature with power 4 or greater. Well, that's overcosted. I feel like this, I mean, isn't Reprisal 3 mana? I feel like this is literally just a worse card than we've seen in the past, so I'm not excited about that. This feels like maybe they wanted it to be able to come into play as a tapped land and just forgot to change the price, the casting cost on this one. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to be good enough to play. It's certainly going to be something you'll keep a look at, an eye on in your sideboard, because if you run up against a deck that has a bunch of big creatures, you'll certainly be not embarrassed to be having this in your list. But overall, I mean, I'm just talking about pre-release, by the way. Of course, for other formats, you've got way better removal than this. Tazim Raptor, the 3 casting costs 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you can return a land you control to its owner's hand. This one's probably fine. The ability to get extra landfall later on. It is setting you back a land, which is a little bit of a problem, but this is probably going to come down kind of later on in the game and potentially actually help with mana fixing as well. If you need like double green and you only have 1 forest, then this type of thing can potentially help you out with that as long as you're playing this along with something else in the same turn. Tazri, Beacon of Unity, 4 and a white for a 4/6 is actually not too bad, but it also costs 1 less for your party, so potentially a 1 mana 4/6, and now you really have everyone's attention. And then that ability of looking at the top 6 cards of your library to get up to 2 cards for your party or an ally and put them into your hand. This card, I think, is going to be very good in Limited, and that ability, you know, white, black, red, green, or 2 means that you can pretty well win any type of stall out with this. As long as you're able to kind of plateau, like just hold off the opposing forces, make it so attacking is just not a good idea, you're going to pull so far ahead with this card over time. So I think that one, you know, as a mythic, you rightfully should be excited to play that if the rest of your white is able to support it. And that is it here for white. We will do the rest of these. I'll probably have to double up these videos just because the pre-release is this Friday, if you can believe it. My numbers are still not solid. I wanted to get the pre-orders online for you guys, but they're not totally solid yet. So I should be hearing exactly what they're shipping me probably tomorrow or Wednesday, and then I will put those pre-orders live on the website. I know some people have been asking how they can support the channel, and we will be able to accept those pre-orders through the website starting very soon. It does come out this Friday, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Even though we won't be able to play it in store, we'll do some stuff over Discord and make sure that it's a good time. So thanks for watching, guys.